Hi everyone, Salim Barahmi here, Director of PIPD with another episode of Dardashe, a series where we talk to inspiring and amazing Palestinians about their lives and careers. Today we're joined with Dima Khatib, journalist and Managing Director of AJ+. Dima, thank you so much for being with us. How are you?
Hi, it's a pleasure to be with you and your audience around the world.
Thank you. How are you holding up in these really surreal times?
Holding up, well, we have to, we Palestinians are very resilient. It's kind of, it's good because we're challenged. I think everybody's challenged, and we're looking for alternative ways to think, to do things, and to feel, and that's important because it'll teach us lessons. And I think we'll be better when we come out of this. And again, we're resilient. We're Palestinians, so
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I think it teaches us to be stronger and better.
Absolutely, yeah, and hopefully creating a different kind of normal on the other side of this.
Empathy. I think empathy
Yeah.
would be a great lesson. I think unity and solidarity, those are great lessons. And again, that's very Palestinian.
That's very true. That's very true. I wanted to start with your childhood. You're Palestinian, your father's Palestinian, your mother's Syrian, and you grew up in Syria. What was that like being Palestinian in Syria?
Well, first of all, if you are born in Damascus, you're very lucky. It's an amazing city. And growing up in Damascus is quite something, because you only realize it later, obviously, when you look back and compare Damascus with the rest of the world, and you realize you were brought up in history. Mm-hmm. Between, like you were literally like drinking and smelling and feeling history all the time. So it's quite an advantage. And jasmine of Damascus follows me everywhere. I mean, I have jasmine here in my house on the balcony. In Latin America, where jasmine doesn't really grow much, I had jasmine as well. I have jasmine everywhere. In Hong Kong, I had jasmine. Wow. So Damascus stays with me. Obviously, growing up under Hafiz al-Assad's regime is quite a traumatizing experience once you get out of it, because when you're in it, you don't realize that there are these other choices out there. So being a Palestinian back then, it was kind of a mix of two things. First of all, you are different because you are not 100% Syrian. Mm-hmm. But Syrians didn't treat you differently, but you knew you were different. And I think growing up in Syria as a Palestinian is much, much better than many other places in the Arab world, because Syria did give us access to education, to healthcare. Mm-hmm. And when it comes to other details as an adult, obviously it gets a little bit more complex, but we did have that basic access to education and healthcare, and I think that's very important to acknowledge. But at the same time, you kind of try and hide that you are Palestinian. At the same time, it was not good to be Palestinian in those days. In the 70s and 80s, it was associated with people that were kind of unwanted, terrorists, people who come and take over whatever country they go and base themselves in, and so it was like, say it but not say it. Like everybody knows it, but you don't say it, or you say it and you don't know. You're diplomatic about when to say you're originally Palestinian and when you're not, because you would not be able to tell who is Palestinian and who is not, just looking at them or listening to their accent, right? So I think my father was the main character in the house that taught me to be Palestinian, and my grandmother. So my grandmother was evicted from her house in 1948. She was pregnant. She was 9 months pregnant. She already had 6 children, and she was evicted when they told them that there was going to be a battle and that they were going to be protected if they left the house. And that was the Jordanian army that took them out of their house in northern Palestine. She walked. She didn't take anything with her out of the house. She said she took just a bucket and I think a stick. And she lost one of her children on the way, and they were pushed into the border with Lebanon, and she had walked all this bit and gave birth immediately on Nakba Day to my aunt.
Wow.
So my aunt was born on the Lebanese border, on the Lebanon side of the border with Palestine. And yeah, they called her Intisar.
Which means
victory, yeah. And they thought they were going to go back, obviously, and this never happened. So it's quite traumatizing when your grandmother has lived this, and you grow up to be a teenager or a child, and your grandmother has the radio on, or Mahmoud Darwish's poems in a tape, the old tapes, the old tapes, cassette in Arabic.
Yeah.
The cassette. So she would listen to Mahmoud Darwish's poems all the time, or to the radio, because she was waiting every single day for the news of return. So every day, that's the first thing that she would do. Listen to the radio, because she was sure it was going to happen at some point. She never, ever gave up. So my grandmother said before she finally died here in Qatar, many, many years ago, and she was in her 90s, she said to me something that I think has defined me a lot, which is, she said, "Irja'i ya sitti mashi." You have to go back on foot, just like they made me go out.
Well, that just gave me goosebumps.
I know, every time I say it, feel like it gives me goosebumps. Irja'i ya sitti mashi. He wants me to go back the same way she was pushed out, walking. I mean, she was pregnant 9 months pregnant. Imagine, like, my aunt is born on Nakba Day. Nakba, for those who don't know, is the day that Israel suddenly appeared as a state on the land that used to be my grandmother's and my father's and my grandfather's. And it means the catastrophe. And it's all these Palestinians that were just pushed out of their houses into other countries or into other parts of Palestine. So yeah, it's a story. It's a story that that I carry, and that I definitely tell my children, my son Faris, about. And my father, he was a militant with Yasser Arafat. Yasser Arafat used to come to Damascus and have mjaddara city, mjaddara that cooked by my grandmother. She was very famous for it. In her apartment in Abbasiyin. Abbasiyin is really downtown Damascus. And my father fought with Yasser Arafat. I mean, fought as in fought not with weapons, but fought with words, with tactics, with strategy, for a long time before he married my mother, because Yasser Arafat said that you had to stay married to Palestine, to the cause of the year, not to a woman. So, my father finally gave that up at some point and decided to get married and have us, a family, with the Syrian lady who was my mother, who is my mother, and stopped this and just gave it all up to become an intellectual and a dedicated writer and literary critic. Obviously still working on Palestinian issues, but not from a political perspective.
Sure.
Yeah. So yeah.
That's quite an amazing story. I guess with that rich history, with such a powerful story from your grandma, how did you feel like you could connect with Palestine, or how did they help you connect with Palestine, being in Syria? And then how did you navigate that as a child and growing up there, where being Palestinian was looked down upon, unwanted?
Not really looked down upon. I would say just different. I think Syria was very tolerant, and still remains very tolerant. I never remember my friends making me feel bad or negative about being Palestinian. I just knew I was different. And I had other Palestinian friends like me as well who are born in Syria. I was also different to them because of my mix with my mother and because of my father's background. You know, I think every Palestinian is unique and different. Every person is unique and different anyway. But yeah, I would not say it made me feel bad. I was just not sure how to go about it. Like, you are neither Syrian. We don't have Syrian nationality, although my mother is Syrian, but you know, women in Syria don't pass on the nationality. And plus, if you're a Palestinian refugee, you remain a Palestinian refugee, because that's the deal with the UN. That we're born refugees. We're the only nation in history that is born a refugee. You become a refugee when you are something other than Palestinian, when you're evicted and like you have to go live somewhere else, forced to do that. But we are born refugees, like generation after generation. We are a first, I think. Yeah. It's never happened before. So I think the realization of what it meant to be Palestinian came way after I left Syria.
Okay. Was there a moment that really put that into?
I think definitely the time that I really felt I knew what it meant to be Palestinian was my time in Latin America. And I think before that, it was all me trying to understand and a kind of like identity struggle of whether I say I'm Syrian or whether I say I'm Palestinian or both. And, you know, why would I say this or would I say that? And when would I say this and when would I say that? And remember that back in the 80s and 90s, traveling on a Palestinian refugee document from Syria was absolute hell. You know, like hardly anyone recognized it. You were nobody, basically, with that document. That changed. That changed for the better, and then changed for the worse with the Syrian situation getting very complicated. So, you know, it was like you had to hide that you were Palestinian when you traveled in Arab countries. That's for sure. Like, you know, being Palestinian was bad for any Arab airport. And you know, even in Europe, when I first traveled to Europe, like I was hiding that I was Palestinian. Many of my friends discovered that I'm Palestinian later on when they followed me on Twitter, and they would say, "Oh my God, I knew you in university. I never knew you were Palestinian."
Can I ask why you hid it from friends?
Because I think the psychose, you know, like of living under the Syrian regime, I think followed me for a long time. And I thought, since I entered Europe saying that claiming I'm Syrian, because we had Syrian passports, but not Syrian nationality.
Okay.
I had the Palestinian travel document, the refugee, but back then my father couldn't get me a visa to go study in Europe on that. So he had to go around and, like, you know how it is. He had to make, you know, I remember him going to the Swiss embassy and saying, okay, you have a choice either of giving my daughter the student visa. I had a scholarship from the UNESCO and the visa was like taking ages. Either you give her a visa on her passport or on my passport, which was like a special passport. So you choose. And I ended up going to Switzerland as a Syrian, not as a Palestinian, because it was going to be very difficult. So I thought I had to keep quiet about being Palestinian. Obviously, the Swiss were not Hafiz al-Assad's regime. They were not going to follow up what was I saying, and I don't think they cared. But you know, you come with this mentality of not, like don't tell anyone. And I think I freed myself from that much later, after many years in Europe. But yeah, so I think I came to the realization of what is Palestinian in me and what is Syrian in me, and how they don't contradict, and how I accept both only in Latin America. Because, and we'll talk a little bit more about that, I think it's because I realized in Latin America that Palestine is not my cause alone. It's the cause of every person seeking freedom and social justice.
Yeah.
That freed me a lot. That freed me. The Latin Americans helped me become the Palestinian that, I always wanted to become, basically. Because in the Arab world, it's very complex. You don't know if being Palestinian is good or bad. And it's quite like, when do you say, when do you not say? And plus, like, knowing Palestine through my grandmother, and my grandfather died when I was 2, so I never got to talk to him. From my aunties and from my father, only showed me the refugee side of Palestine. When I went to Switzerland to study, I met this lady from Haifa, and I found out she's Israeli, and I was so upset with her. Obviously, I had no background, like my father or my grandmother. Nobody told me that Palestinians who are in 1948, territories have an Israeli passport, and it's not their fault.
Yeah.
I was so upset with her. I was like, how could you be Israeli and stuff? And she was like, kind of like, what are you talking about? And so, like, getting to know the rest of Palestine through the people I met outside of Palestine. And then later on, I met the Palestinians who were never deported or evicted from their houses, like from Qada Ramallah or other parts of the West Bank. They just lived all their life in their village, and they're Palestinian. They don't have the experience of the rest of us. And I was like, oh, there is like that too. Palestinians who were born in the village where their grandparents were born in the same village, and they're still there. Yeah. And I met them in different parts of the world again. Yeah. So that's why I'm telling you, it takes a long time for you to understand Palestine. It's not enough to get it from your family, because your family is only one side of a very complex and long story.
That's one of your dreams, to walk back home.
Yeah. If I'm not going to do it, my son will do it. I've told him the whole story. He knows all about it. He was born in Venezuela, so he's Venezuelan. And his father is from yet another country. And he's, his Palestinian identity is shaped by just the stories that I told him, obviously. And he knows he's going to go back for me on my behalf, because he can with although Venezuela doesn't have, cut ties with Israel and stuff, but he will manage. He has a better chance than I do of returning. So yeah, he knows the whole story, and he knows that I want to go back on foot. He knows all of that. He knows, and he when he was learning karate in Venezuela, I remember he told me he wants to get to the black belt. And I asked him why. He said, well, I have to get strong so I can go pick up grandfather. And, forget about grandma, because she's Syrian. She can stay like where she is right now in Qatar. She'll be happy. We don't need to take her. We just take grandfather, because he's the only one who knows where the house is. And I want to take him back. I have the black belt, so I'll be able to defend him. And we're going to knock, at the door and tell them to leave, and رح أكسر راسهم, he goes, رح أكسر راسهم, I'll knock them down, and I said to him, I said, why do you have to do that? Like, why do you want to do to them what we did to them, what they did to us? Mm-hmm. I think that you can find a better way of giving grandfather back his house, and I've tried to. It's a balance between making him realistic about what a solution is, and still keeping this incentive in him of fighting for the right of return. Yeah. But yeah, he said he wanted to get, so this is how conscious he was when he was probably 4 or 5. Wow. Yeah. Because of the conversations we have a lot of conversations about this.
There's a very famous quote from Ben Gurion: the old will die and the young will forget. And I think there's every Palestinian, mother and father, grandmother and grandfather have a sense of duty and responsibility to share the story of Palestine, with the next generation. And it seems that you have, and how is it navigating that for you? And how, being able, as a Palestinian woman, there's certain restrictions on what you can pass on, what you cannot pass on. How is that for you?
Yeah, so the thing is, I don't have a nationality yet. I have,
You still don't have
like,
one.
no, this is an issue, and I think a lot of people will think that I am just a spoiled, like, kind of romantic thinker, and I may be that, but I find it difficult to accept the idea that I have to go become a national of another country that I may not have ties with, like a citizen of that other country, just so I can have the right to visit my own country.
Yeah.
It's or I would become a citizen of a country, like, if I can practice citizenship. I want full citizenship, as in, like, responsibilities and duties, and not just, carry a passport and go travel with it. I have carried different passports from different countries because I'm lucky. I'm a journalist, and I have a strong voice, loud sometimes. So, like, I've had different passports given to me, again, without nationality, and that expire, and then you can't renew them. So I've had Yemeni passport, I've had a Syrian passport, I've had Venezuelan, I've had a multi, and I've used all of them to travel sometimes when I needed to, but being Palestinian is that blue travel document that was given to me by, Syria. And that's the only citizenship that I actually have, which is not a full citizenship, but I still want to use it and travel with it. And I still do, actually. When I was in Latin America, I made sure, although I had other options, I still traveled on that because I wanted to make sure that Latin American countries acknowledge that we exist. I understand perfectly when others go and get another nationality because they need to. I feel I have the luxury of fighting for our rights to be acknowledged as refugees. I can do it. Others can't, and I respect them totally, and I don't judge them. I mean, they should go and save themselves and get a life, because this doesn't give you many options. But for me, it's a different perspective because I have media power and I can use my loud voice. So I did that in Latin America, and it worked with many countries, with Nicaragua, with Ecuador, with Bolivia, with Brazil, with Venezuela. I raised the issue. They didn't know. It's not that they don't want to let us in. They just don't know we exist. They don't know about the variety of documents we have. So yeah, that was one experience. So I still don't have a citizenship. I've traveled the world. I counted the countries I've been to, and I stopped at 80. I said, that's enough. For karma's sake, I will not count more. And I've lived in more than 10 countries, probably 11 countries, something like that, around the world, in 5 or 6 continents. And I managed to do that mostly with my travel document.
That's incredible.
Mostly. Yeah.
Will your son be able to inherit that travel document, the blue?
No,
mix?
because the Syrian, because Syrian constitution does not allow women to pass on refugee documents to the children. His father would have had to be a refugee for him to have a travel document as a refugee. So he's not a refugee. He's a refugee at heart.
Yeah.
Which is good enough. And something I try to do, because I tried to go to Palestine so many times, and I'm tired of trying. So I thought, okay, I'm gonna buy a piece of land, and this piece of land will be my return. Like a tree, an olive tree will be enough for me. I will have returned if there's an olive tree that is in my land. And I told my son, when you go back, you're gonna go back to our land. I've been waiting for more than 2 years to get the authorization to actually buy this land in my name. I know foreigners who just do it and they get it in a week or 2 or a month. It's so scary. It's my country. I can't go and I can't buy land in it. It's like, it's so unfair and so surreal.
What is your experience of trying to visit Palestine and not being let in?
I get invited all the time to give, to conferences or workshops or things, and they always say, "We'll apply for you," and they apply and they never get a reply. I even got invitations from the Palestinian Authority itself, like things organized by them, and they didn't manage to get me the authorization. So I always wait, and I tried through Gaza as well, and the Egyptian intelligence said that I needed a special permit from Cairo because I'm a journalist. I never got. And whenever I got invited before. I don't do this anymore. I'm kind of over it. I would say on Twitter, I got invited to this and I was not granted the permit, so I will not be able to attend. Yeah. And it's funny how there's always an Israeli organization that will try and get in touch with me and tell me, well, we can get you the permit. Send us your travel document. We'll get you the permit, but you have to come and visit us or take a picture with our whatever. There's always PR stuff.
Nice propaganda.
There is no way on earth.
Yeah.
I'm gonna accept for me to go back into my country, even for a visit, hand in hand with my occupier who is stopping me from going back into my country. I mean, what were they thinking?
Yeah, no, it's insane. It's insane. I want to talk about your experience with Latin America because it's been so formative for you, and also I think it made up a big part of your journalism career. Why did you want to go there in the first place?
I think I felt I had lived in America, in the United States. I had lived in Europe, and obviously in the Arab region. And I felt we were getting one source of information, philosophy, mentality, seeing the world, perspective, which is the North. Yeah. Which is a specific North. The North that has either colonized us or is still colonizing us in different creative ways.
Yeah.
And I felt I needed a connection with something else. And Latin America seemed to be the place that I connected with the most. I studied Spanish when I was 18, and my idea in the beginning was Spain. I connected with Spain emotionally to study Spanish, but it soon shifted to Latin America when I went to study in Switzerland. I studied in the University of Geneva, and I met this Mexican lady, and we became friends. And then I met Peruvians, and then I met other nationalities from Latin America. And I felt a connection with the Spanish ladies as well, but it was north-south connection still. I was a little bit romantic about Al-Andalus. Maybe I didn't find that with the Spanish friends that I met in the university, because I studied translation. So there were different sections, the English, the Spanish, the Russian, the French, different. So that was a nice mix. And with the Latin Americans, I found, oh my God, we have so much in common.
Yeah.
And so much in common in terms of struggle, in terms of fighting for freedom, in terms of revolution, in terms of so much stuff. And I felt, oh my God, how did I never read about this? How come they never taught us about this? How come they were still telling us that somebody discovered America, and we study this in school, and we still say it? That's the point of view of somebody else, not ours. That's the point of view of somebody else, not theirs, the Latin Americans. That's the point of view of the colonizer. And it hit me that everything I know about the world is basically filtered.
Yeah.
And I felt I wanted to be the bridge between Latin America and the Arab world. Later on, when I became a journalist, I felt that was going to be my mission. I wanted to see how I can bridge those two through, obviously, reporting and writing. But I was so drawn to it. I was literally, before going to Latin America, I had lived in China for 2.5 years. And I think that also helped me broaden my horizon and think of so many different perspectives, because China was going through the big boom of development. Literally in Beijing, I would go to a restaurant and want to go back to it a week later, and not only would I not find it, I would find already a new building being built.
Wow.
Like, you would go around, you'd think, I'm sure the restaurant was here. And I lived that other perspective of the Asian tigers, the Asian development.
Yeah.
And that, I think that prepared me very well for a landing in Latin America that will allow me to see things from so many different perspectives, and not just my Arab perspective or the North perspective where I studied, because I studied in Europe and I studied in the US. So yeah, I think Latin America was a mix of romantic, but also a very curious journey, looking for a different truth. And yeah, I'm glad I made it. I think it shaped me as a journalist. But again, I told you, it shaped me as a Palestinian. It made me into it made me the Palestinian I became.
You said very, which was it's the moment you realized that we're part of a bigger movement for freedom and rights and equality around the world that liberated your Palestinian identity in a way. How did that come to being, and what does that mean?
Well, first of all, wherever you go around the world, you're trying to navigate whether it's good or not good to say you're Palestinian. Mm-hmm. Back then. Now I think it's different, and I think that's great. I think thanks to social media and to civil society, we managed to change the image of Palestinians in a lot of places, although that's not the case yet in many Arab countries. That's not the case. But most of my life, I was trying to navigate whether it's good or not good. I landed in Latin America. It's actually good to be Palestinian. Mm-hmm. It's a place where, like, not just at the airport, but everywhere else, like, you tell people you're Palestinian and they're honored to meet you. And they're like, hey, pa hermana, and stuff. And like, they're like, kind of like, we're comrades in the struggle, And they're so, sometimes, and I wrote about this when I was in Latin America, sometimes people on the street, like in Venezuela or in Brazil, in many countries, in Chile, obviously, and Palestinians are very famous in Chile, people would say, oh, it's such an honor. You're the first Palestinian I meet. Can I hug you?
Wow.
And you know what it feels like to be rewarded for being Palestinian after all these years of being like evicted, refugee, fighting for your identity, fighting to get visas, being damned as a Palestinian, whatever, just, and suddenly it's actually good to be Palestinian. And Palestinians in Latin America have built economies, have contributed to the welfare of people. They are successful people in society. They're politicians, they're artists, they're businessmen, they're everywhere obviously in different proportions, but they're actually a positive, part of Latin America. So being Palestinian suddenly felt it was okay, and I didn't have to struggle against it. And that helped me accept me as a Palestinian, much more than all the other past experiences of having to navigate and feeling fear. So fear was gone. I was Palestinian, and I was unapologetic about being Palestinian. And then I discovered through my conversations with Hugo Chavez, who is right behind me. Sorry, not behind you, behind me. And he's the only person I have around the whole living room who is in a picture, because he's very present still in my life today. So I discovered, like, I couldn't understand how somebody born in Venezuela, mix of like black, white, and indigenous, from a very rural area of Venezuela, believes in Palestine and wants to fight for it. I couldn't understand, what is it like? And talking to him made me understand that any just cause in the world should be aligned with Palestine. And Palestinians should align with any just cause in the world. And being Palestinian is not a travel document. It's not the story of your grandma. Being Palestinian is believing in that cause. So anybody around the world, to me, became eligible to be Palestinian from that moment on. I felt the connection with Palestine through Latin America much more than I had felt it through even my own people, because they have this clarity of what it is about. It's about injustice. It's about pure injustice that cannot be tolerated and accepted and cannot be sustained and needs to be changed, needs to be replaced with justice. It's so clear cut. It doesn't have the politics, it doesn't have the sectarianism, it doesn't have everything else that's mixed in that, in this region where everything is mixed with everything. So yeah, and then Evo Morales was another one. And Evo Morales, like, this guy is an indigenous, purely indigenous person from Bolivia. First indigenous president elected in the history of modern Bolivia. When Bolivia everybody looks like him. It's only like a minority of white or mixed people that live in certain neighborhoods that don't look like him. So they were governing the country for so long, since the Spaniards were kicked out. And after so long, finally, an indigenous person reaches power. And I am given the first interview that he's ever given to a journalist being a president-elect, the next day after being elected. And he talked about Palestine. And he was so conscious and so clear, again, about Palestine. And I was like, what does he know about Palestine, being from Bolivia? And how is it, like, again, it gives me the goosebumps, because that happened to me with all of the others too. Lula is amazing. I mean, I could show you pictures, actually. I was just looking at my pictures with Lula, and I gave him some gifts. I gave him a kufiya, and I gave him and Lula could lecture us about Palestine.
Where does that affinity for Palestine come from?
You're going to be surprised when I tell you, and I think many people may not realize that, it's Fidel Castro.
Wow.
I think Fidel was this father of the revolutionary Latin America that I got to live. I lived the episode of the revolutionary left. And I left right when it was over. Basically, when Chavez died, the decline started. And I think Fidel was so aware about Palestine. And you know how I have a picture of me with Chavez here? My father had a picture of him and Fidel in our room, in our house in Damascus, in his office, and they're hugging each other and they have a cigar, because my father represented the Palestinian Liberation Organization back then in talks with Cuba.
Wow.
So he went and met with Fidel back then. And, Fidel is the teacher of all of them, of Chavez, he's like their mentor. He was their mentor all the time. So I think it comes from him, because how would Evo find out about Palestine otherwise? Evo didn't go to university. Evo has Palestinians in Bolivia who voted against him because they're from the bourgeois, from the bourgeois, fine, very fine, let's call it very, very niche part of Bolivian society that are very rich and that saw in him a threat to their economic gains, because he's a socialist. He was gonna, impose taxes, and he was for the people, and they didn't like that. So they voted against him, and they didn't like him. So the Palestinians he knows about in Bolivia were not gonna lead him to love Palestine. So that, and if you look back, if you go back in Latin American revolutionary history, you'll see that Palestine was always present, always. So I think it was Fidel, and I think that they all connected with Palestine through Fidel and probably other factors as well, in such an ideological way that made them just so confident about it. That confidence that they gave me, that pride that they gave me. So just saying I was Palestinian was like to them was like, oh my God, you're Palestinian, you know? And if you go to a place like Chile, you'll find that the Palestinians of Chile did a great job putting Palestine on the map in the Chilean memory, in the Chilean present, in the Chilean reality.
Mm-hmm.
They're really, really good. It was the first time I actually understood how a lobby works. Because in Chilean parliament at the time, there were Palestinians from right-wing Pinochetistas, you know.
Mm-hmm.
There were Palestinians from all the way across in the middle, center, so social democrats and like center. And then you can find them all the way, obviously, to Allendistas. Mm-hmm. So no matter what the politics were, Palestinians were there. And they were fighting over internal domestic issues in Chile, because between Pinochetistas and Allendistas, obviously there's a huge gap in terms of social welfare, in terms of taxes, in terms of a lot of things. But they united always on Palestine.
That's incredible.
And that's a lobby. That's a lobby. And like a presidential candidate in Chile, what did it look like? It looked like this. Take these two pieces of art behind me. One of them was Palestinian, the other one was Jewish. Wow. And they were who? The money behind the campaign. Because out of 10 families in Chile, the richest families of Chile, 3 are Palestinian, and they're very powerful. Mm. So if you wanted to win the elections, you had to have money from one of those families. And, you know, that was a big lesson for me. So if you know, it was different sources, obviously, why Palestine is so present and so strong in Latin America in general. And the nice thing in Chile, that it's present with different people, not just the left. It's actually there. Well, you cannot live in Chile and not know about Palestine. It's not possible because it's everywhere. Santiago, one of the mayors of the biggest quarters of Santiago, he's a friend of mine. He's Palestinian, and they're all so unapologetic. And if you look at how they were called Jose and Juan by their parents, because their parents and grandparents wanted to integrate, they are calling their children Tariq and Khadija because there's like this comeback of accepting your identity. That's so great. It's quite it's very beautiful to live that.
It really is. I was trying to think about, you know, when I traveled, have gone somewhere and Palestinian identity was so celebrated and welcomed, you know, because I've spent most of my time abroad in the global north. And so it's never been.
Ireland and Scotland.
Sorry?
Ireland and Scotland.
Ireland, Scotland, that's true. Yeah, that's true.
And Sweden to a certain extent, and Norway actually are very welcoming.
Yeah.
Very respectful. Not emotionally, okay? But Scotland and Ireland is an emotional experience. Norway and Sweden are very respectful and very correct, I have to say. And people are very aware as well. You know, they know. But Ireland and Scotland is like, hey, comrade, you know?
Yeah. I haven't made it to Scotland yet, but I've been to Ireland, and that's very true. The thing I think that really resonated with me, you said, it's not about your identity, it's not about your nationality, it's about the values you subscribe to. And we're, you know, part of this bigger family fighting for certain things in this world. And so you don't have to be Palestinian to be part of this struggle. And I think this is the part of us trying to communicate Palestine to the world, saying, listen, it doesn't matter who you are, where you're from. If you subscribe to these certain values, you should be able to stand up for justice, for freedom, for equality and rights.
And you know, many people who may have heard me now about Fidel and Chavez and stuff will, you know, many people argue, oh, these people were not democratic, they were not this, they were not that. And I always like to clarify that you may disagree with a lot of people that you align yourself with. You don't have to agree with everything they do and they don't. And this is the only way we Palestinians can actually survive. If we're going to look for the perfect and ideal, allies, we are never going to go anywhere. We have to be pragmatic. And so, just because I find myself always having to explain that to a lot of Arabs because everything is so black and white. Mm-hmm. And yes, it is a tough choice for us to think, okay, we want democracy, we want freedom, and some of the people that support our cause are not necessarily that democratic. And I'm not talking about Chavez, maybe I'm talking more about Fidel, because as a journalist in Cuba, I did not feel free.
Sure.
That's a paradox. Like in my head, I did not feel free as a journalist because there is no freedom of the press in Cuba. Obviously, 50 plus years of the blockade, can be used as an excuse and stuff. And this is a very complex issue. But I mean, I learned to embrace things differently and not, be a bit more pragmatic and not be so idealistic about finding allies and learning from them, because mostly it was a learning experience for me.
Mm-hmm. It reminds me of something Nelson Mandela said. He was in the US and he was interviewed by a bunch of conservative reporters, and he said, how can you support the PLO and Yasser Arafat? They're terrorists. And he said, they're fighting the same struggle we did, and they supported us when we needed them the most. And so it shows you, I think, the power of such.
And that's a conversation I had with Chavez. I remember I said to him, how can you be such good friends with Ahmadinejad? Mm-hmm. And I traveled with Chavez to Iran several times, and I met Ahmadinejad with Chavez. And I said, like you want democracy and you want your people to be free. And like Iran is kind of, dodgy. And how can you be such good friends? And, he looked at me and he said, Dima, come on. International politics requires pragmatism. If I were to eliminate everybody who is not 100% like I would want them to be, and who is not against me, and who is, I would be alone in this world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a very good point. That's a very good point. I wanna transition to your time after Latin America.
We could do a whole hour on Latin America.
I know.
Like 3 hours.
I just wanted to, if I had the time, I wanted to ask you more about Morales, Lula, and Chavez and the conversation.
And Correa, and like lots of, and Dilma as well, and Nicaragua, lots of them. I can tell you about, they were all on the same page.
We'll save it when you walk back to Palestine. We can have a coffee and I can hear all about it. I wanted to, as someone who works a lot on sharing stories, and especially the Palestinian story, I was always in awe of what AJ Plus was able to do, and also it being a pioneer in the digital space, digital media space. But I don't know much about the story, the origin story. How did AJ Plus come to be? And take us through that.
It's very funny because many people think, or don't expect at least, that that AJ Plus was originally preconceived in Latin America. So yeah, this is a story I told some people in Latin America when I talk about AJ Plus. I explain to them the story. It's back before Arab revolutions happened. Al Jazeera was thinking of an Al Jazeera in Spanish television channel, like Al Jazeera English. Mm-hmm. So I worked on the project, on the proposal, and I found that, I kind of found where to do it, how to do it, and everything. But I found that the distribution was going to be a huge challenge for us because the two cable companies that control which television channels reach the homes of Latin Americans are never going to take our editorial line, especially on Palestine.
Mm-hmm.
So I knew that for us to succeed, we had to have, distribution guaranteed. Otherwise, what's the point? Like, you're going to have a channel and nobody can watch it.
Mm-hmm.
So I said, okay, we have to maybe make our own distribution, like maybe our own cable company, and try and bring people on, like companies and people on other broadcasters and stuff. So it was going to be really, really huge. And obviously the budget went from like just a TV channel to a huge project across Latin America. So, and I said my recommendation was not to do it because it was going to be very challenging in terms of distribution. So we thought, how else can we serve Latin America? And we thought, why don't we do something online? And we came up with an idea of video online. So breaking the chain of programming, which is TV, linear, into a consumable video service online, which is not linear. So it's not that you wait for it on a couch, it's 8 p.m. and you watch it. And if you watched it, you watched it. And if you didn't, you missed it.
Mm-hmm.
Rather something that is non-conventional, where we would post videos. And I did the first pilot for that in Spanish out of Venezuela, the first video. And
what year was this?
This was probably 2000 and is it 10 or I don't know. It was a long time ago.
Yeah. I'm just trying to understand the digital time frame, but yeah.
It was before Arab. It was before Arab revolutions. Probably 2010. I think I was in Chile a lot that year. Anyway, so. Please don't take my word on it. I may not have the exact date. Maybe, yeah, I think it was before Arab revolutions. Anyway, Arab revolutions broke in December 2010. So later on, we were not given the budget for this project. It was going to be in Portuguese and Espanol, and we wanted to connect Latin American Arab diaspora inside Latin America, as well as connecting them with the motherland, like Arabs, so they would find out, like the idea of the bridge that I had always in my mind, that obviously I think I did do that through my work with Al Jazeera. I was the only correspondent in Latin America from the Arab world ever, and like for a long time. I think after there were others that went, and so it was like another step, like something even further. So that didn't go through, but the idea of it stayed with us.
Mm-hmm.
And the group of people that I had brainstormed with, and they're amazing. They're from South Africa, from Canada, from different parts of the world. They were working for something that Wadah Khamfar, another Palestinian who was leading Al Jazeera back then. He had set up this new media unit, and they were part of it. And I was working with them on that idea. The idea stayed in their mind, and they didn't let go of it. So when there was an opportunity in San Francisco, when Al Jazeera bought Current TV, that was Al Gore's TV.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I remember that. Yeah.
We were in San Francisco. That's like the heart of high tech. This is the place where you can make something new. And these guys took advantage of the space, the opportunity, to come up with an idea that was similar to that idea that we had developed for Latin America, but in English. Mm-hmm. And by then, social media had exploded. And by then, I was the most connected woman on Twitter in the Arab world, because I covered from Latin America the Arab revolutions through my Twitter account in 5 languages every day.
Wow.
I became literally the most connected Arab woman on Twitter from Latin America, because it gave me like the perspective. And I was safe. Mm-hmm. I was never going to be arrested by any Arab regime, and I was very dedicated, because revolution was what I wanted to explain to Arabs from Latin America. So when it happened in the Arab world, I fully embraced it. So they contacted me and said, Dima, remember we wanted to work on a video project. Look at this video we just made. Can you post it on your Twitter account? You have a lot of followers.
Mm-hmm.
And that video, and it was about Palestine. It was Dina Takruri. It was about Gaza. So it was like graphics, music, a cool presenter, and lots of information, and very simple. And that video it was not a video embedded in Twitter. It was a link to YouTube back then.
Yeah.
I'm telling you, really, doesn't it? Like when people, so it was a link to YouTube on Twitter, and it was so well received. And that was like one of the very first videos of AJ Plus, and it was so powerful to be able to reach the millennials of the most powerful country in the world through our journalism and our editorial line on so many issues, on social justice, on Palestine. And we embraced Black Lives Matter. We embraced indigenous movements, a variety of causes that were important to American millennials. And minorities, obviously, a lot of, so it was quite an interesting time. So we grew from San Francisco in English. It was a big thing for us. Then I set up Arabic in Doha. Then I set up Espanol in Mexico City. Latin America still in me. And then I set up Français, AG plus Français. That's the last one. That's the baby AG plus, which is not a baby anymore. It's a teenager, I would say.
Yeah.
And they're all very successful and very impactful in the different target societies and target markets. AJ Plus is now in 4 languages. We have 7 YouTube channels. We're on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram as well. And we do shows, we do entertainment, but with a message. We do news, we do current affairs, we do short documentaries. We make you laugh, we make you cry. And I lead a team of young people, millennials from around the world. It's a very beautiful diversity that we have. Even within the teams, we have diversity within the diversity. So within the Arab diversity, we have Amazigh and Arabs and Christians and Muslims and, very religious people and very liberal people and, all of it mixed, mashed. And the same thing in America. If you look at our team is like, Black African Americans, Hispanic Americans, Italian Chinese Americans, I don't know, all kinds, white, everything is there mixed. Muslim. And in the leads in DC right now, because we moved from San Francisco, there are 3 leads. One is Muslim Canadian, one is Jewish South African, and one is British Christian. Those are my 3 leads in America. It's the mix of, and they're all, obviously the South African is now a New Yorker, but he's originally he's a Jewish South African. And
I think I know who you're talking about.
is Muslim of Pakistani, origin. So it's beautiful. I love it.
It's amazing that you've elevated and there's a platform for all these voices to be able to connect different stories that are usually not heard by mainstream, especially by the millennial generation. One question I wanted to ask you is, how do you navigate the line between journalism, because at the end of the day you are a news outlet, and what might be seen as activism or advocacy on some level? Is that something that you found hard?
Do you see us as activists, or do you see that we do advocacy?
No. Well, I mean, I think in terms of the stories you cover, and because
we cover stories of that. Yes, obviously, yes. That's cool. Yeah, that's right. So because our editorial line, and we are part of the Al Jazeera, obviously. I come from Al Jazeera. I've been with Al Jazeera for 3 years now? 23 years. Oh my God. That's like the age of the people I employ to work for AJ+. I am married to Al Jazeera. So obviously Al Jazeera's values are in AJ+. Al Jazeera's mission, voice of the voiceless, ethics, it's all in there. Mm-hmm. But we are different in the sense that, working in the social media sphere is very different to linear journalism. Working in the social media sphere means you have to get personal, and you have to be at the same level as your audience. It's not like me in Bolivia and saying, I'm the only one in Latin America and I can tell you whatever I want, and the only truth you'll hear is mine.
Sure.
Right? That's how we were like, Dima Khatib, Al Jazeera, Caracas, Venezuela, and I was the only one. How would they verify what I was saying, or my point of view was, it was like, that's it. Television or newspapers were the truth for us for a long time, because we could not be part of it, and we could not debunk it, and we could not have access if it were not for those media outlets. So social media needs different kind of approach. So you have to step down. You cannot be the authority that knows the truth. You cannot impose any truth, and you need to be very modest. And there is no difference between you and the audience anymore, except that you are a professional storyteller. Everybody is now a storyteller too. The only difference is that this is your job. You're a professional. You have ethics and you have principles. You tell stories based on that. And the others have different principles, different ethics, and they're not necessarily professional, and that's not their job. So that's where we had to change our approach to make it survive and thrive in this mentality, in this new philosophy. So sometimes the way we tackle issues is so personal. You feel like our journalists tell their own stories.
Yeah.
We did a series, Untold America. We took every one of those of our journalists, Syrian American, Chinese American, Indian American, and they told their own stories. And through their stories, we got to know the story of America, of all these immigrant societies. So it's very personal. Do we cover social justice stories? Of course, we are voice of the voiceless. I keep saying we should be voice of the voiceful as well. The problem is being voice of the voiceful gives more space to those in power who already have a voice, and therefore diminishes the chance of the others to have a voice. So if you went to Tahrir Square, and this goes out to Al Jazeera as well, this applies to Al Jazeera as well. When I was a journalist, if you gave as much voice in your story to the police and the army that are killing the people as much as you gave the people, you are not doing professional journalism, in my point of view. Why? Because the police and the army have power. They're already shutting everybody up with their bullets. They have a voice, a very strong voice. So if you wanted to be fair, you would need to give voice to those who have least voice. And then within that group of the voiceless, there will be more voiceless people than the rest. You need to do that exercise again, because those same voiceless may practice the same repression onto others within their group. You need to go again to the least, privileged, and the least voiceful, if you want to, So that's what we do. So we do journalism, we do storytelling, but we're very creative, and we love to tell stories that are untold or that are told, but we love to look for that angle and that perspective that may get very personal and may look to others that, they're doing activism, but that's not what we're doing. We're very clear on us being journalists, not activists.
No, that's a very good point. I in terms of the equal amount you give to the two sides of the story, and if one has inherently a power structure to it that benefits it and allows it to share its story much more than the voiceless. No, I think that does make sense. I wanted to ask you, what have you learned about the way people consume information and news since you've been head of AJ Plus?
The way people consume information and news, that's a very broad thing. There are so many choices today. I think it's changed so much from the way they used to before, when they had one or two choices. I mean, in my childhood, we only had like Syrian TV and newspapers that the regime dictates, obviously, and the radio, and it was all the same. There was only one way of seeing things, single track. And today, it's up to you to decide how many different views you want to hear, because the internet is open. You want to stay in your own echo chamber, and a lot of people choose to do that, whether consciously or not. They still do it. You can, and you will think the whole world is exactly like you. You want to challenge yourself and get out there and see if you can take the other points of view, and maybe 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 or 10 or 15. You know, that's up to you. And I think people now know that it's their choice. When they go and read one newspaper that they know is right-wing, that's their choice. They want to see the world from that point of view, and they want to think this is the only truth. And people know that. Yeah. I mean, they know that. So if you watch Fox News day and night, you know what you want. You either too lazy to go see the rest, or you just don't want to. And it's fine, as long as, you know, like, we know that you know. Yeah. So, you know, the way people consume news and current, you know, and information today, I think is so complex, because the more choices you have, the more confusing it becomes for a lot of people. And although what I just said makes it sound simple, it's not that simple. Because fake news, because of all the others I told you are storytellers, but are not professional, they are there, and they impact our views as well. If we don't know how to make the difference between the truth and, you know, points of view, or is the truth also a point of view? You know, again, we're going to enter. So it's very confusing. And I think social media has made it very difficult for us to know what the truth is, because you watch something, then suddenly your mom sends you this video on WhatsApp, and it just, you know, you're like, how on earth, like, did mom get this video? Like, this video is such a conspiracy theory video that she believes, and she literally believes it, and you have to debunk it for her. And when you show her the original story on professional media, she's kind of like, oh, you know, like, what about this one?
Yeah, it's we're entering a very complex environment, and so I wanted to ask you, where do you see the future of journalism going? In the sense that when there was a need for new methods of distribution, social media and digital was there, and you were able to tap into that to reach many more people. Also, the evolution in content. You know, you said we make you laugh, we make you cry. There's entertainment, but there's also information. Now there's the added minefield of fake news and etc. Where do you see things going, and how will media and journalism evolve from here?
Journalism doesn't change. To me, the journalism I'm doing with AJ Plus and the journalism I was doing with Al Jazeera on TV is the same. Because it all depends on the message you have. The format is something that will always be evolving with technology. The format and the platform and the audience, like different audiences for different platforms and different formats. But the essence of journalism is the same. To me, it has not changed. I've only changed the means, but not the essence. And I think your journalism is defined by your values and your message. So if you get a very hip format and you have a great platform, but you have no message, you won't survive. It's very clear to me that even if the medium changes and it becomes like, maybe in the future, the way we consume news is so nonlinear that we build our own consumer like patterns on our fridges and in our cars and maybe around the house. Maybe it's on a screen that we can't touch, that you never see, that is, I don't know what they're going to invent. It doesn't matter. To me, that's not changing the journalism that we're offering. It's only us adapting, and that's what we did in AJ Plus. We used technology. It's not technology that defines the journalism. We used technology to evolve the storytelling formats in the new platforms so they would fit in with the new audiences. Technology does not define what kind of journalists we are. It's the message and the values. So if you look at the experience of AJ Plus and me being a Palestinian, and obviously Palestine being such a strong element of Al Jazeera's history in general and editorial line, right? I mean, it felt like such a great opportunity that we could be talking to millennials who may be finding out about Palestine for the first time in their life when they're so young, through us, through our editorial line. I mean, what an amazing opportunity. Technology is giving us that. And like tapping onto those audiences in the US, and we reach so many of them through AG Plus. And then Latin America, Mexico has 100, more than 100 million Mexicans live in Mexico. And like, just on Facebook, there's like, if you remember, there were elections in Mexico, and López Obrador won. And we did something called Verificado, which is a fact-checking initiative that we launched. I believe we helped up to 13 million new voters who are voting for the first time in their life understand what they're up to, instead of the disinformation and misinformation that Mexico usually goes through. And I have covered Mexican elections as a journalist, and I know. So imagine the opportunity that technology is giving us to do the journalism that we want and reach out to the people, to more people, and to the people that we want to reach out to. Whatever happens with technology, the future of journalism is in our hands, not in technology's hands.
That's very powerful. That's in terms of the theory of change for us as PIPD. We're very much a campaign and advocacy organization that does a lot of content, but for us, it's very much that it's presenting a message based on values to reach younger audiences around the world so that they can interact with what it's like to be a Palestinian and aspire for those things. And we do believe in the democracy that is offered by digital and social media, and the opportunity provided for us to tell our own story and not have to go through traditional media outlets that have had a very specific perspective for very long.
Although that being said, I have to say that there's not much difference between the satellite companies that would, like Hotbird or whatever you name it, that would help us reach audiences back in the days of television, and still the case today, and Facebook.
Yeah.
In the end, they're the same. They decide when to pull the plug, who is on and who is off, who's good to be on the platform and who's not. The cable companies have always, and satellite companies have always said, no, we don't want this one, we want this one. And, in the end, they are distribution, exactly like Facebook or Twitter or YouTube, who, set the rules because they are the ones who help us reach your audiences. We don't have our own distribution ground. We just make content.
Yeah, and we just faced that recently with a lot of our tweets being censored, and nothing to sharing it.
You take it or break it, you know?
We literally shared a New York Times article that had Palestinians in the title, and it was a feature about some of our work, and they censored that article. I mean,
and what
that's
do you do about it? I mean, you can do advocacy, but you know, they are the platform. You
exactly.
accept the rules. They never said they were democratic. They never said, you know, they're a company, just
Absolutely.
like the cable companies, or the you know, just like the satellite companies, just like what the future holds for us. It's the
Yeah,
same. To me, never changes. It's the same.
it is. It's
We
frustrating.
don't have our own distribution. Again, what I faced in Latin America, if we were going to reach the Latin American audiences that we wanted through the TV channel, we had to have our own distribution needs.
Do you think that's something, before we move on to the next subject, do you think that's something that can be created, a type of social media or news distribution network that's a bit more democratic in a sense?
I don't know. I think it can be. Of course it can be. It just who's going to do that? I don't know.
Under what business model, I guess.
Yeah, like, and what's the goal of that? Because I mean, these business models are based on profit.
Yeah.
Is democracy profitable? Is it a profitable business? I don't know. I mean,
Yeah, that's a good question.
and what is democracy after all? I mean, I'm also like questioning the whole,
Yeah.
and I mentioned democracy many times in this interview when I am myself going through a rethinking of what democracy really is. And I have to say I am in a lost moment about
Imagine.
this whole concept, especially in COVID, you know, especially in this COVID-19 crisis. I feel like everything is failing us. Well, what's the point of, you know, like democratic systems that supposedly gave people the right to choose the leaders they thought were gonna keep them safe, and they didn't.
Yeah.
Because they invested in things that are different to what people needed today in this huge crisis. So was it good to be, was democracy not really real, or was democracy not viable for this? Or what was lacking? What is it that didn't work for us? Why did we not invest in the things we needed to invest in around the world? So, you know, I think capitalism and democracy may just not be compatible. And that goes back to answer your question. Will a democratic social media platform or platform be a profitable business? I don't think so.
Yeah, that's
Unless we rethink profits.
yeah.
Capitalist word, you know, the capitalist concept of profit needs to be rethought of. What is profit? Like becoming richer than everybody else? What if profit became something a little bit more equitable, a little bit more, you know? So yeah, I don't want to confuse you and get you into the. I'm going through mazes and mazes of rethinking.
It's totally fine. I think it's a very interesting conversation about the link between capitalism, democracy, and the state of media and the business of media. I think we can save that one for your coffee in Palestine as well. The last thing I wanted to ask you, and it's incredibly important, is you're one of the few Arab women media executives and within the Arab landscape. You know, how has it been? What are the challenges you face? What has your experience been so far?
Yeah, I get asked this question a lot. Well, I was empowered by men all my life. I would say my mother also empowered me in a very special way, but I was mainly empowered by my father, by my brother, by a lot of men that literally pushed me and motivated me and trusted me throughout Al Jazeera as well. I was always empowered by men. And if you look at AJ Plus today, I'm very happy that I broke that chain. And now I'm empowering women and men. We are 50-50 in leadership positions in AJ Plus. If you look at AJ Plus Français, it's led by a woman. Ajuda Plus Español is led by a woman, and AJ Plus Arabi is led by a woman.
Amazing.
We have the three that I told you about in English, so we're kind of you know,
Mhm.
it kind of, yeah. And even our staff, it's 50-50. Sometimes it's over 50 for female staff. And I didn't do this because of a quota that I set. This
Mm.
happened naturally. It happened naturally. I think that, you know, when female talent sees an opportunity to grow, they work very, very hard.
Mm.
And I think when they saw that I was leading this, and they didn't have to go through the filters, the usual filters, they grew very, very quickly. And then that made the men also work harder, because then they had to, you know, speed
Sure.
up a little bit. So it's a very competitive environment, which I think is very healthy, and it should be like this. So I'm very happy that I broke that within AJ Plus. But if I go out there,
Mm.
yes, I'm still the only woman in the meetings, executive meetings of Al Jazeera. I'm very proud, obviously, but I would like that to, you know, change. And I'm also the only woman in a lot of places I go to. Even when I go to Scandinavia, like the
Mhm.
top executive job is mostly a white male, usually in their 50s or 60s. And you know, I go around the world and I see that this is still an anomaly for women to reach a top executive job. You can see it in the US, you can see it everywhere, in
Yeah.
all the modern and developed, most developed countries around the world. So how have I lived this? I think I'm having a great time. I I think I enjoy it, I cherish it, I appreciate it, and I work on where I think what we've done in AJ Plus is great, and I think if I leave, I hope that what I have built within AJ Plus will remain after I leave, in terms of the roles and the diversity. Diversity, as I told you earlier, in the kind of people we employ is
Mm.
the same. Diversity of gender is the same. So I hope that the leaders that have grown within AJ Plus will remain. They will. I know they will remain leaders, and they will grow to become even bigger leaders later on. But in terms of changing the bigger, I don't know. I think the Arab world is going in two very opposite directions. It's very strange.
Yeah.
It's like going backwards and going forward. And sometimes it looks like it's going forward, but it there is a backwards in it. So women are more liberated, and I hate to explain this because it is very complex, and emancipated, and that means they just took off clothes, you know, and
Mm.
showed off uh, social media stuff. I don't know, became famous. But here inside,
Mm.
I don't see the liberation.
Yeah.
I see that I see rather a kind of like not being, maybe they're subjected to values that look
Mhm.
from the outside like that they are liberating and they are liberal, but they're not deep
Mhm.
inside. So
Mhm.
that's why I say, and at the same time, there was a time when this whole Islamist also, like, it was a Islam and democracy. This is also like a very confusing
Sure.
debate that goes on, and so while you see that women with hijab find that it's liberating for them to have the freedom of wearing the hijab in the West, it's still for many a debatable, concept, whether it's oppressive, repressive, or not repressive.
Mhm.
And I can't believe that we're still talking about, like a piece of cloth on, and today in France they can go all like with a niqab on, and it's
Yeah.
actually, no, they can't, they have to cover
Yeah.
up their face, while niqab is
So
still
bad.
forbidden in France. So it's a very confusing time. So for me as a female leader, I try to focus on what I can do. I try to focus on what I can change through, like, the leadership I can practice.
Mm-hmm.
I'm very grateful, and I think I do believe in a female leadership model, which is based on empathy, and that's what I do.
Mm-hmm.
I go always from a motherly kind of approach, and I think this is something I built thanks to Faris, my son, who taught me to be understanding no matter what happens, who taught me to be forgiving no matter what happens, and who taught me to understand a point of view and a perspective that is different to mine, and forgive and find a solution, give a hug, and like think of how to avoid this next time rather than create conflict or embrace conflict. So I think empathy and motherhood, and I think strong female leaders have all showed that in COVID-19. Empathy, you know, and I really believe in that. And I think I went through a phase of being very masculine when I was in Latin America to maybe be who I became. And even in the newsroom in Doha, when I became a small leader in the newsroom, I had to, because otherwise, like from a female perspective, I was not going to be respected for who I am, only for what I look like. It's TV, you know, you have to play on the looks.
Sure.
And I had to start acting like I am masculine. I think I worked a lot on my masculine side to be practical and be successful and to be able to compete with the men, because the sphere is controlled by the men. As I said, I was empowered by men.
Yeah.
And then I reached a stage where I am today, where I know that being feminine is actually a strength, not a weakness, as I was led to believe a long time ago. So I combine the two of them, and I invite every leader not to shy away from their feminine or masculine sides, because both should be there, because your employees are feminine and masculine too, and you need to embrace the feminine and masculine side in each one of them as well. For you to do that, you need to have that in you, accept it and live it. So
that's incredible advice. That's incredible advice, Dima. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for your time. I really enjoyed the conversation. It was so rich. It was full of amazing stories, and you've led an incredible life and so much more ahead of you to come. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Salim. And I look forward to more conversations over coffee in Palestine.
Inshallah. Fingers crossed.
If I can't make it, please have coffee with my son and
I
visit
will.
the olive tree that we will have.
He will always have a place to stay here.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Take care, Dima, and stay safe and healthy. Bye.
Bye.